reading this series, I've been listening to the Luke Cage Netflix show soundtrack.
Yeah.
Which is amazing for anybody out there. I know you know, but for anybody out there who hasn't seen the show, soundtrack is perfection.
I'm like a huge like score nerd. Like I have playlists that are just like scores from like the Marvel shows and the Marvel films and like.
Oh really?
Like I remember name titles of some of the songs from the movies. I'm just.
It makes great. It makes great background noise when you're reading the comics, though. It really sets the mood. Well, it's so good to see you. For those of you who don't know, if you follow me and you don't follow CaptWingHead, what are you doing? Go give her a follow because she puts out amazing content on a regular basis.
Thank you.
And tonight we will be discussing the David Walker, Sanford Greene. There's a couple of fill-in artists here and there, but it's primarily the two of them. Power Man and Iron Fist series, which is really like the platonic ideal of a Power Man and Iron Fist series, I think. It's like, if people like this is what you got to read. Oh dear, ooh. I think we lost her. Oh no. Ooh. Oh, there she is. Ooh, maybe. Oh, there you are.
It wasn't me. I don't know what happened there. Okay.
That was very strange.
That was weird. Sorry.
Well, welcome back. Ooh, okay. Sorry, there we go. All right. So the first question I wanted to start off by discussing with you is what was it that got you into comic books in the first place? Like, what's kind of your comic book origin story?
Oh wow. Okay. I'm not gonna go too dark with it, but my father, who passed, was super into comic books. Like his favorite thing ever was Superman, and like not like the recent stuff. Like he was obsessed with like the Christopher Reeve Superman films. Like he loved those, and he grew up reading comic books. I think the first one he ever bought me was like a Catwoman comic from a flea market when I was like 8 years old.
Wow.
So I actually started with DC, and like I'm talking like Batman and Robin 1998 DC. That was what I was reading, and I mean that's what I was looking at. And I had like the little bookmark that was like the Batman Bat credit card thing. Like I was that kind of nerd, but
that's amazing.
And then I didn't read comics for a very long time until college, and then I think the one that got me back into it was Matt Fraction's Hawkeye run. So.
Oh. I mean, if you're going to get back into it, that's the one to do it, right? So do you find that you, from what I can recall from your content, like it feels like you're kind of, you are an enjoyer of both. You dabble in both Marvel and DC. It doesn't seem like there's one you tend to prefer over the other. Is that safe to say?
It's hard to explain because like recently it has been all DC recently.
Sure. But, wow. Okay.
I do tend to, like, when it's Marvel, it's like I go through phases of, like, I'll just read Marvel and I'll just read DC. I don't really, like, flip-flop because, like, during COVID, I lost track of my pull list.
Oh, no. Well, hopefully she'll be back in a second, folks. Sorry to anybody who's watching. Hey, everything okay?
I wonder how to fix it because I'm sure it's me. But
can I try sending you a co-host request? I don't know if that'll make it better or worse or not. Let's try that. So you go live and I'll send you the co-host request.
Okay.
All right, cool. See you in a bit.
Okay.
Sorry, folks, for anybody who's out there watching. Thanks for sticking with us.
Okay.
Okay. Good.
Better.
No, I hope so. And now we're in an equal-sized box. This feels more fair. I like this better.
Okay. But okay.
So you were saying that you find that now you're reading a bit more DC than Marvel. You kind of fell off things during COVID.
Yeah, because my pull list, I got really behind. I felt bad. So I've been reading trades mostly, but you know, DC, was it not Universe? That's what it was. Infinite
Rebirth. Oh, okay. Oh,
yeah.
The app. Yes. Gotcha,
That's super
gotcha.
helpful.
You know, I haven't tried that one out yet. I feel like I should give it a shot.
It's, I think, similar to Marvel where it's like every
Sure.
6 months, but
Okay.
they do have like, I'm not a huge fan of it, but the Robins round robin thing is on
Yes.
there like
Oh,
time
interesting.
in like the Super Sons, the short little challenge of the Super Sons, that's on there like as it
Oh, okay.
now.
So they've
So
got some digital firsts on there too.
yeah.
Interesting, interesting. All right, good to know. Well, I guess I want to start with the question of what is it about this particular comic that made you say like this is the one I got to choose for this talk. This is the one I want to reread.
Okay. Because like
A
I do
big question.
I haven't done this as much in my account recently, but like I do have a degree in psychology. So like the
Oh,
reason
cool.
I initially was going to do She-Hulk was because it was like all about like PTSD and like the
Sure,
psychological
sure.
aspect. But part of the reason I chose this one is because I'm like extremely biased partially.
Oh, what? I'm so jealous right now. That's so cool.
I don't know if you can see it, but like it's a weird
Yeah,
story. My first Comic-Con ever, I went by myself. I knew absolutely nothing. And I walked straight into Artist Alley and I spoke to Sanford Greene and he was
that's
so nice to
amazing.
me.
Wow.
He was like, "Oh, do this. Make sure you have a schedule and like all this stuff. Make sure you drink water." Like he was so nice to me, and he gave me this. And well, I mean, I did. I think I paid for this one, and he also gave me one from Wakanda and the Crew or Black Panther and the
Oh,
Crew,
yes, yes.
and he gave me a bit of root art for free. And he was like, you should check this out. It's gonna be great." And so I did.
And he was
Like
right.
he's super nice. Like I was already interested in Luke Cage, and
Mhm.
also the comic book shop I went to in Austin, the guy I called Fun Uncle or something. We called him Uncle. It was weird. He recommended. He was like, if you like Fractions Hawkeye, you should read Immortal Iron Fist. So that was the first one that I read. And then
Sure.
this book comes out, and I was like, okay, I like Luke Cage. I like Iron Fist. The guy that do the art for this was like super nice. So I read the book and it was just so much fun. Like
Yes,
I
yes.
like fun comics. That's like my thing. I like the ones that are super like fun. So
Yeah, yeah. You're in good company. I completely agree with you on that one. So prior to that, like, what had been your history with the character of Luke Cage? Like, what did you read about him? Because I know he turns up for a little bit in that Matt Fraction Iron Fist run, but
mm-hmm.
was there any other prior experience you had with the character? Or was this your first like proper Luke Cage title?
Um, let's see. Because I have an uncle who super loved Marvel comics because my dad was DC and he was Marvel. And he did
I love that.
recommend. He also, like, he was big in just, like, anything that was, like, kind of blaxploitation type of art and,
Sure,
like,
sure.
that kind of thing. So I think I may have, like, checked something out that he had, like, his old books of comics. But the one, like, I remember my first impression of Luke Cage was actually Jessica Jones, that series
Oh, okay.
by Bendis.
Interesting. Interesting. That's such an interesting first exposure to the character because I feel like I don't think it's not that I think he's poorly written, but that was like
Oh,
a weird
like,
time for the character because you also had that weird Brian Azzarello Luke Cage comic that came out at the same time, which is racist. I think that's really the best way I could describe that book. And that the Alias book I feel like is almost a better presentation of Luke Cage in that time period than a lot of the other 2000s Luke Cage stuff.
Yeah, because you get like he's in it a little tiny bit, and he's
Right.
mostly like supporting Jessica.
Right.
But then you get the 2005 New Avengers run, and then
Right.
like that had that issue with them on the date, and then
Yes.
like it's got some like little cute moments of them. So I loved that. Although like the show clearly didn't want to go with like them having a great nice relationship.
Yeah,
So
they went
sad.
some interesting directions with that in the show. But I'm glad you brought up him being a part of the Avengers because I think, you and I talked about this when we were first planning this, but like this year is the 40th,
50th.
50th anniversary of Luke?
I
50th,
believe
50th anniversary of Luke Cage. Yes, I'll take your word for it. I'm bad at math.
You're fine.
So it's his 50th anniversary, and he is a character who I feel like is unique among superhero comics because you can really see a growth and change in the character over time. When I think so many superhero characters are constantly being reverted back to a status quo. Like, how many times is Peter Parker gonna get married to Mary Jane and then they're eventually just gonna make him single again, right? But there's actually like a pretty distinct arc for Luke Cage when you look at the original Bronze Age comics to now, and I feel like him becoming an Avenger is a big turning point for him as a character in his place in the Marvel universe.
Mm-hmm. Although he does It's interesting how I didn't expect the comic to reference, like, he keeps calling himself an Avenger when he shows up places, but
Right.
like he wasn't anymore. And I had forgotten
True.
how long it had been since he was.
Right. It's been a minute now because I guess when the Bendis run wrapped up, was there even like a really? I'm trying to think. Oh, then there was. Oh, yeah, he was not really involved in any of the Hickman stuff, with the exception of that short Mighty Avengers series, and then
Right.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
don't
been a
remember him
minute
in that.
since he's been like an Avenger proper.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, but on that subject, the other comment that you made to me, which I thought was interesting, was you talked about your love of Dave Walker as a writer
Mm-hmm.
and him being the writer of this series. Can you talk a little bit about what it is about his approach to Luke Cage that you like so much?
Um, let's see, because I feel like it's really easy to write Luke Cage as like you just get like the 70s dialogue. Like some people
Right.
think that's
Yeah.
enough, but David F. Walker really did something great that I don't want to sound insulting, but I kind of feel like writers of similar background to Luke Cage get this more,
Sure.
which is the emphasis on the community.
Mm.
He focuses on how like Luke feels like Harlem is his community, and so regardless of if you are a bad guy or regardless if you are considered like a hero or anything like that, like community is community. So like scenes like it also is in his Luke Cage series that he wrote, which is like there are funerals for people who were technically considered bad guys, but Luke
Mm.
still goes because it's like showing respect to people who are part of your neighborhood and your community.
Right.
And like I feel like the show captured that as well, but like David F. Walker took this and decided to like lean into the 70s blaxploitation, like the kung fu sounds that Danny is making when he's fighting. Like he leaned into the parts that people probably would have thought was too cheesy to like bring into 2016. Like he
Right.
leaned into it. The villains are funny. Like David F. Walker brings this like it's just I feel like it has so much more life in Harlem when he was
Totally.
in, as
Yeah.
opposed to like I do like a lot of other books, but like the way David Walker brings it, it's also in his Bitterroot series too. You can feel the community and like
Mm-hmm.
everyone just feels like they belong to that neighborhood.
Yeah.
So
He does a really good job of, and maybe there's a word for this that I'm just not familiar with, but it almost feels like world building but with characters. You know,
yes,
the
yeah,
way, like you said, you're describing it being a community, and you see that through these rather than like showing you places that are specific, you feel it in these characters and their interactions with each other and their place in the world. And I'm so glad you brought up the villains because I really love the Bronze Age 70s Luke Cage comics. They have issues, some of
yes,
them, obviously.
but
But I also enjoy the sort of like weirdness of them, especially when it comes to the villains. And I thought David Walker did such a great job of taking these villains that on paper seem kind of goofy and making them feel very real and human. Like
mm-hmm.
rereading the last arc, the Harlem Burns arc, I thought it was so brilliant that he was like, "Why did so many of these old Luke Cage villains have fangs for teeth? Let me find a reason as to why." Like building that whole idea of them all being like childhood friends, and then they
Mm-hmm.
were in a gang together, and then they had a falling out. I was like, that is such a brilliant little piece of comic world building that I don't
Yeah,
think anybody would have considered, but it fits so neatly into everything.
and making fun of the guy with the fish fur face.
Yes, Mr. Fish. Nobody laughs at Mr. Fish. Yeah, so I think he does such a good job of taking these villains that are otherwise seen as, like you said, like kind of cheesy blaxploitation, two-dimensional characters, and making them feel like, oh no, these characters are like real people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Sanford Green's art doesn't hurt either.
Mm-hmm.
What do you feel like were some of the standout moments or characters in this book for you?
Let's see. I will say, like, I talk about this a lot on my account, but I like it when they actually give a black character a support system instead of just
Mm.
having them be one. So while like Jessica's not
Mm.
in it a lot, like she does kind of like help guide Luke into like not the right way to do things, but she just kind of supports him in the background. Also fixes some
Totally.
of his problems because when he was having that issue when Danny was in jail, like she was working with Colleen and two other characters. I feel bad I didn't know where they came from. The two characters that were helping Colleen.
I like now, like they're totally blanked out of my mind, but like I
It's okay.
remember
Like
who you're
they
talking
were
about. But
two
yes,
people I think were taking pictures of whoever was tailing them. So like that was kind of a
yes,
like neat way to put Jessica's like detective skills to use in like the
yeah, yeah,
background. And she was actually supporting Luke throughout that, which I thought was kind of cool because my kind of issue with his presence in Jessica Jones was he was kind of just there to support Jessica, but this actually it shows them like mutually helping each other. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, totally. I think that when you have a character like Luke Cage who is it's kind of like it's not quite the same as the Superman problem, but it's similar in that he is invulnerable, right? Like that can sometimes be challenging for writers to come up with conflicts for. So I think that is why he ends up in those supporting roles too often when he is such a great central character. Like he shouldn't be relegated to just those supporting roles. But I do agree with you. And that made me think of something you mentioned, which was like you talked about how David Walker is somebody who you trust with Luke Cage as a character.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting because it's like, I think you can only say that in superhero comics where you have so many writers coming in and out. Can you talk a little bit about like what that means to you? Like when you say, oh, I trust this writer with this character. Like, what do you mean by that?
I try and be only the positive. So I'm only
mentioning you can be a little bit negative if you need to be. Just a little bit.
It's just, there's some writers who have written Luke quite a bit. And they don't really flesh him out as a person. Like they use like his strength and everything, and I don't like that some writers use him as like just to make him like a figure that scares people, because I think that's really strange when he's such a character with so much heart, and like he always tries to like come to solutions that aren't violent first if he can.
Yeah.
So some people just rely on him being scary.
Right.
But David
Which has problems of its own if we dig into that. Yeah.
And David F. Walker was building the supportive marriage arc that was happening at the same time that a different writer was writing Luke and Jessica having marital problems. And that whole thing where like Luke was seen like yelling at her or something, and it was taken out of context, but he was recorded, and it was this whole thing in the news and everything. And then they end up like separating briefly.
Yeah.
So you have David F. Walker being, why can't we have him have a happy marriage where he walks around in yellow shirts that say Big Papa on it? And he can't drive a car that makes sense. He drives a smart car because Jessica won't let him drive the other car. Like cute things like that, because David F. Walker wanted him to have that. And then other writers didn't want to put him in a situation with a good marriage.
Which is so funny too when you read the comic, because you can tell they editorially made them put in the marriage trouble, and it kind of comes out of nowhere if you're only reading that comic and you're not reading the Jessica Jones comic that was going on at the same time. Yeah, and it's funny too because what you're saying is like so much of what I see as the evolution of the character. Like I feel like the 70s version of Luke Cage was the guy who was like he comes into the room and he's like all eyes on me. He's very much like The Rock in some ways. He's like very big personality, boisterous, and now I think what makes him so interesting is you can see he's kind of like, look, I'm a dad now. I have a very different outlook on life. I can't be that guy anymore. So when you take that away from him, it definitely feels like the classic comic book reversion that always happens, taking away the growth at the expense of the character.
Yeah, but I mean, it's sad. Like, I mean, I'm glad he's moved on to other things, but like, I don't think David F. Walker is probably ever gonna come back and do something else with this character. But
yeah, it's a bummer.
Yeah.
Why out of curiosity, why do you think that?
I don't know. When they did the Comic-Con at home, I did watch a panel that he was on, and like he did talk about like the things that were important to him, but I got the sense that he didn't feel like Marvel was going to it was going to let him, I guess, do what he wanted to do creatively. And that's why a lot of them end up going to indie comics anyway. Right. And I love Bitterroot. Like I'm so glad that he's moved on to that kind of project.
So phenomenal, yeah.
And also it's the other thing of like, what is Luke doing now? Like I did remember I read War of the Realms that he was in with Danny when it was that whole Thor thing. It was him, Spider-Man, and Captain America. That was a really good issue. Yeah. But like aside from that, I don't remember the last thing I read with Luke Cage. He had that book that got canceled recently. I think that was
and when you said that comment about, I don't know if you said it directly or if you were inferring from what David Walker was saying, but that comment about feeling like Marvel editorial wasn't going to let him do what he wants. It sounds like the reason it got canceled was because of some editorial scuffles between the writer and the higher ups in terms of like the content that he wanted to put into it. Because from what I saw in the initial press release about the comic, it seemed like it was going to tackle police brutality in some capacity.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's really interesting because he also had a book called like Nighthawk or something that very much did go straight into that, and it got like 4 issues or something before it got canceled. But I was like, I'm shocked they let it be created. I didn't think they would let you do that. Like, wow. I mean, I read it. I kind of like felt like I should read this now. I'm gonna take it off of Marvel. I was like, I didn't think they would let him do that. And I can't imagine how you would write a book about Luke Cage and not lean. I mean, they did it a little bit in the story, but not. I imagine he probably wanted to go even more in detail with it. But
yeah, it's this funny thing where, well, I shouldn't say funny thing because nothing about this topic is funny, but it's this thing where this character, purely by accident, fits so well into our current climate. You know what I mean? Where he could be used to tell these stories in a really powerful way, and yet it doesn't seem like anyone wants to fully commit to that. Or I should say, not that anyone doesn't want to do it, but the powers that be will not allow them to fully commit to those types of stories.
Like, let me ask you this. Do you think it went deeper in the shows because it was on Netflix and they didn't have to worry about maybe the broader audience seeing it? Because I feel like Netflix went in much deeper than like some of the
they did. I definitely think they did, but they would also occasionally have those moments where I remember this really sticking out to me like a sore thumb. But I remember one of the later episodes of the first season, I want to say, there's a scene in a police station where one of the cops is like, hey, look, we're not all bad. Sometimes it's just a few bad apples. And I was like, this feels incongruous with everything else the show has been telling me up to this point. So that was like a weird moment where I felt like some executive at Netflix was like, can we just put in a line where it's like, not all cops are bad, but the show seems to be going in the total opposite direction. I do agree with you that the show was a lot more unafraid to tackle that issue than a lot of the comic stuff have been.
But
what is your overall thoughts on the Luke Cage series, out of curiosity, the Netflix series?
Oh, I really liked it. It was actually, and it's an unpopular opinion, it was my favorite out of all of them. I really liked it. I have a weird relationship with the live action Iron Fist because...
Oh, really? I was not expecting that.
But what I mean is, like, I really actually liked the episode where he was in Luke Cage. Like, I thought that episode...
That was a great episode, yeah.
Yeah, and they had, like, great chemistry in that. And I thought they actually... I was surprised Defenders did include the discussion about privilege, because I was like, I didn't think they were going to go there. But I liked the Luke Cage show a lot, and I did... I mean, it was kind of heavy-handed, but I liked the Godfather references throughout the second season. Like, that last shot was totally supposed to be referencing the Godfather.
Totally, yeah.
Because, like... I don't know, I guess you could say Superman has this problem too, but like when you have a character like Luke Cage who's supposed to start like morally right, they always have to like have some type of situation that drags him down and like gives him gray areas where he has to like deal with what's morally correct, and he does do that. Also, Mahershala Ali was fantastic as Diamond, was it Diamondback? Is that his name?
Yes.
Yeah, he was great.
So I'm so glad you said that because it always bugged me that people were like, oh, Diamondback shows up and the show gets bad. I'm like, no, Diamondback in that show feels straight out of a 70s Luke Cage comic, and I kind of love it for that. Like, I kind of like that it really gets comic booky where he's wearing the suit that, like, gives him, like, exoskeleton powers and stuff. I was like, this feels very classic Luke Cage comic book, and I sort of love that they went for it with that. So, agree with you 100% on that one.
Yeah. Like, Cottonmouth and Diamondback were great, and I actually learned, I guess I knew things, but I learned a little bit more about his history, unless they changed things and I didn't realize it.
Which character?
His father, Luke.
Yes.
They dug into that more. So I did learn some things I didn't know, because I kind of started straight with when he did meet Danny in the comic books. And they didn't go back into his family a lot until the Luke Cage series that David F. Walker did. They did.
Yeah.
Stuff.
In my memory, because there's a... Did you ever read the Al Ewing Mighty Avengers comic?
Well, because there's 2 Mighty Avengers, I thought. Is that
it's the one that has where Sam Wilson is the leader, and Sam Wilson as Cap is the leader, and Maria Rambeau is there.
I don't think
Monica Rambeau. Why am I saying Maria?
It's
Monica Rambeau is there.
I don't think.
It's actually pretty good. The downside of it though is a lot of it's drawn by Greg Land, so that's kind of a bummer. There's a part of me that's like, why couldn't Sanford Greene have drawn this comic book, perhaps? But no, it does a really good job of like what you're describing with community. Like there's a lot of interesting community. Sorry, someone in my chat, for the love of comics in my chat, just wrote ha ha ha. Oh, Gregland, ha 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 ha. Yes, it's very unfortunate because otherwise it's Al Ewing writing these characters, and Al Ewing's a very good writer, so it's very good. But the Greg Land art is bleh. But there's an interesting story arc in it with Luke Cage's dad, and they kind of have like a reconciliation with one another after sort of being apart from each other for so many years. So there's some good stuff in it. I would definitely recommend checking it out because it's one of those like hidden gem kind of books. Just pretend it's drawn by somebody else. Okay. Is my biggest piece of advice I could give. I thought that the show was pretty good. The music is amazing. Like I have the vinyl record of the soundtrack because I just thought it was so well done. I just always feel like, I don't know if you feel this way, my biggest critique of all the Marvel Netflix shows is that I feel like you could cut it down by like 2 or 3 episodes.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of the plots get dragged out.
Because like it was on Netflix, so I don't think they had to have so many episodes, but yeah, I agree. That's totally, yeah.
I hope they get to bring Michael Coulter back because I thought he did a pretty good job in the role.
Yeah, it's strange because like the way that those articles were written about Charlie Cox coming back, like I got the sense they were confirming him and what is her name, Kristen Ritter. I got the sense like people thought those two were definitely coming back.
Right.
But I wouldn't be that upset if they did cast someone else for Iron
Man. Were you mixed on his performance overall, or? I know you don't like to be negative. You don't like to be negative. Yeah. It's okay. You're among friends here.
Like, what part of his performance in Game of Thrones said Iron Fist? Like,
you're talking about Iron Fist. I thought you were talking about Michael Coulter as Luke Cage. Did I say Iron Fist? I meant Luke Cage.
No, Iron Fist.
Okay.
The one I was talking about.
No, I think we all feel that way about Iron Fist.
I was like, Luke Cage was like, yeah, but Iron Fist was kind of like, we could go a different direction.
We could do something different.
Just to try it, just experiment, film it, and then see what it looks like.
I hate to be cynical, but it definitely feels like when they announced there was a new Iron Fist, it feels like they're like, they gotta recast this Iron Fist. We need somebody new.
And I haven't seen is it not Pei or is it someone else that they're?
Is Pei Swordmaster? No, Pei is the young girl, right?
Yeah.
Okay, no, it is not her because she's still like 5. It's the character who was Swordmaster.
Okay.
And his whole thing is that his sword exploded, and now this is kind of gross, but it's also kind of hardcore. His pieces of his sword are like embedded in his hands.
Okay.
So he like has the power of the Iron Fist and also the power of his swords in his fists. So he's kind of like literally an Iron Fist because like the iron of his magic sword is in his fists.
I don't know. I was just picturing Edward Scissorhands, but okay. I was like, how does that work? Is it like a Wolverine?
He has like sword fingers.
I was like,
that actually sounds better. They should have done that.
I was
frankly.
like, new direction? Okay.
Really unique take, yeah. Went from Iron Fist to Sword Fingers. That's the new character.
Really scary, actually.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to mess with that guy at all. That sounds terrifying.
Okay.
Amazing.
Yeah. I mean, like, you can. I mean, they weren't. It's not like they had like a huge, deep friendship with Luke and Danny in there. You could still have them build up to a friendship with a new Iron Fist. But,
right, yeah.
Yeah, I love Mike Coulter though. I thought he was great. I just didn't know how they would bring him into the MCU. Like, unless they just do another show. But Defenders, I feel like, did make them think we should keep doing another season.
But the funny thing is, I feel like of all the Netflix characters, he would work best. I mean, and the comics have proven this. He works best as an Avenger. Like, Daredevil's never been a proper Avenger. Luke Cage has a power set that works well in, like, Avengers level scenarios, I feel. So I feel like he would be the one that makes the most sense to transition in there.
Yeah. But I don't even know. Have they announced that they're going to do another Avengers, I would think, but I don't know how.
Oh, yeah, eventually.
Or when.
Eventually. Yeah. I think they're doing the right thing of making people wait for it. Because when you make people wait for it, then the moment it finally happens, they'll lose their minds again. So we'll see what happens. But we're not here to talk MCU. We're here to talk Luke Cage. I want to ask you, what do you feel like, we would talk a lot about David Walker, his writing on Luke Cage. For you, besides like the presentation of Luke Cage himself, what aspects of this particular comic, like, would you say work best for you? I mean, in terms of like the way Luke is has changed and evolved over time, or maybe even like the way the villains are presented. I personally love that he brought in Alex from Runaways as like the big bad. That was super cool. But yeah, I'm curious to know, like, what are some other big standout things for you from this particular comic?
I took notes because I'm a nerd.
I love it. Do it. What notes do you have? Let's talk about them.
Oh no, it's like not good. Like there's like
No, I love it. Let's do this. I'm a high school teacher, so I love when people take notes.
I wasn't the biggest fan of the Civil War II arc, so I thought surprisingly this was kind of my favorite tie-in of all of them because it was basically Luke and Danny saying like, we're gonna sit this one out, and then Luke has this whole speech about how can we expect the public to trust us and think that we're good heroes if we're constantly just fighting with each other?
Yeah.
I wondered if that was kind of a dig or if it was just like his message.
No, it definitely felt very meta. Yeah, yeah.
I was like, okay, David F. Walker was like taking a pause because like some writers, I can't remember exactly which ones, have spoken about when they were in the middle of a run and then like basically Marvel, the big, powers that be were like, you need to write in that we're doing this big event into your book. Yeah. And so they did, and I thought they did so in a really like intelligent way with them saying they were going to stay out of it, but then it pulls into this arc about how predicting someone's going to commit another crime affects people who are trying to get their lives back on track. And I thought that was so cool because, again, Luke is uniquely posed to like be in a storyline like that because he does have a family and a wife that he wanted to protect, and he did like turn his life around after being like imprisoned like wrong. And it was this whole thing of how like he was relating to other family men who were put in prison, and they had families that were trying to like get them out because they changed. And it was like, this is like a really brilliant way to use these characters in an arc that I was not fond of. And it's kind of sad because he had to contend with like what was going on with the arc, but I thought he handled it very well.
Yeah, I think what works best about it is I agree with you 100%. It's the best thing to come out of Civil War II. Yeah. Which is so funny because I'm like, oh yeah, remember Civil War II happened? That was how I felt when I picked this up. I was like, man, that nobody cares about Civil War II at all. But I agree with you 100%. I thought he did such a good job of finding a way to approach this while still fitting the themes of the story he wanted to tell. And that whole idea of having I kind of thought of it as like a more nefarious version of Nextdoor, the app that the guys are using to like track down the former criminals and be like, oh, they're gonna commit a crime again. It felt like a great metaphor for the way society treats former convicts, right, or former felons, right? The way this assumption of guilt, no matter what they do or no matter how much they've paid their debt to society, that they will mess up again, and then how that kind of creates, like you were saying, a vicious cycle. That if you assume somebody's going to do something, you're going to put them in a position where they're forced to potentially have to commit a crime. Not because they want to, but because you've given them no other options as a society. So I thought that was brilliant on his part. Really great.
I did like that. And I loved the little henchmen that didn't want to fight. They were really funny. They had like the skulls like painted on them. And they just didn't. They were in charge of trying to get Luke and Danny to come, but they didn't want to fight him at all because they were scared. Yeah. It was like there's a lot of like I thought this book was just like overall all of them were very funny. Like they had some serious moments, but like I was laughing throughout like every single volume. Especially like I read this every year, the Sweet Christmas Annual. I read that every single year. It's so funny.
Which I can't believe nobody thought to do that sooner. I can't believe we've had Luke Cage saying Sweet Christmas for 50 years and nobody thought to do a Luke Cage Christmas Annual until that comic book line. Yeah, that one's great. They fight Krampus, right?
Yeah, and it's Santa incredible. Shows up, and I was like, okay.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that one of the things I also really love about that arc is the way it kind of has that like Twilight Zone-y kind of ending to it, where they have that moment where they're like, we didn't do the breakout that everybody thought we did, but did trying to stop it from happening mean we caused the thing that we were trying to avoid? I was like, wow, David Walker thought more about this than I think Brian Michael Bendis did when he wrote Civil War II. This is heavy.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not going to say anything. I was like, okay. he did something with an arc that other people weren't doing much with. So
I also agree with you about the humor in the book too. I feel like David Walker is underrated in the comedy aspect of things. He's very good at injecting comedy into the books in a way that feels very natural.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Tell me more about some of these notes that you put down. What are some of the other observations? Tell me more about some of these notes that you put down. What are some of the other observations? I love this. No, I'm so glad.
Oh man. Oh, this is one thing. I was kind of making fun of Luke because the part when he has the smart car, and I don't remember what happened, but like the smart car was about to get destroyed, and he says, "Oh man, I didn't get insurance on this." I was like, "You live in New York City. Like, being that you didn't get insurance on your car." It's like, you of all people know what happens to people's cars.
You probably have broken a lot of cars, Luke.
It was the weirdest thing ever. I was like, it was the one thing he did. I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me, but okay.
The whole that comment is just one of those things where like your brain starts to go, what is it like to buy insurance in the Marvel universe? Like, it must be a nightmare.
I could only imagine, like, depending on like how close you live to like the tower or wherever they were home base, like maybe it'd be more expensive, so you would want to move further out.
Right. If you're anywhere near the Baxter building, your monthly rates are going to skyrocket. Yeah.
And then like, because there actually is a such thing as like kidnapping insurance, and like I'm sure every single person who is like rich in that area has kidnapping insurance. Right. You never know. Like, you never know when you're going to need like that in case you
kidnapping replaced by a scroll insurance. You gotta
see, like, that's the stuff I wonder. Like, hypothetically, if you married somebody and they turned out to be a scroll, like, does that mean that your marriage isn't actually legally binding?
Yeah, can you get that annulled if you accidentally married a scroll? That's a great question.
See, like, oh my god, this is such a tangent, but I really hope they bring that into the She-Hulk series, because that was my favorite part about that Dan Slott run. It was just the weird legal questions that they kept answering.
Right. Yeah. No, but that is absolutely what makes that comic so fun, is it gives you an opportunity to ask those weird questions that, you know, you don't really think about when you are first presented with comic book universes. Those things you don't really think about until you try to apply real world logic to them.
I had that where I was making fun of Luke because I thought that was weird. I liked that they did this thing about, it was kind of a dig at like which types of magic were considered important and very powerful, but like the whole thing where Danny's like, I've never heard of, I forgot what it was called, the Soul Stone or something?
Yes, the Super Soul Stone.
Yeah, he was like, I've never heard of that. It's probably not very powerful if Doctor Strange hasn't heard about it. And then they go to see Senor Magico.
Senor Magico is my favorite character. I need him in everything. He's so great. Sorry. Tell me, keep going. Keep going.
Cool. And he was like, excuse me, like, he doesn't sound like a very good Sorcerer Supreme if he doesn't know what this is. It's very powerful. And he was like, this concept of like, there's a whole separate magic that's related to things that Doctor Strange doesn't know about because it's not what he deemed important to know about. And it's also very powerful and very dangerous.
Right.
And it's called street magic, but it came from like something from like Yoruba. It was clearly like based in like, there's also something called root magic that's supposed to be like very tied to like African practices. Gotcha. So it's like, Doctor Strange wouldn't know about it because he would want to know. And I thought that was a really clever way to not only get around like how this may not have been established as powerful and how people wouldn't have known about it. I was like, that's a clever way to introduce this whole other branch of magic that's like super super dangerous actually. But
and this goes back to what you were saying earlier about David Walker and the way he builds communities in his books, right? Like the idea of it being called street magic, that it is magic rooted in the people, like the average everyday people of New York City, is such a great idea, and that there would be a weird sort of class disparity of magic that like Doctor Strange has this sort of like white privilege magic over here, and then Senor Magico is like, no, I practice the real magic, like the magic of the people, you know? Yeah.
He's so funny. He also got, I remember who it was, he got in a fight with somebody that he was trying to help and turned him into a frog.
Yeah.
He's cool. I hope they bring him back in something else.
He's great. I don't know about you, but I just envision like Luis Guzman whenever he shows up, right? Like if you put Luis Guzman in a cape, that's Senor Magico.
That's perfect casting.
It would be so great. We need David Walker back, and we need to just give him a full like 50-issue Senor Magico ongoing series. I would read that every month. That'd be so great.
Yeah, because they were bringing him problems to solve, basically.
Right.
And like, I think, didn't he also have like a pawn shop or something? Or like, I don't know, maybe I'm being like offensive, but I think he actually may have just like had things there.
Right, right.
He was keeping the Super Soul Stone there, like for safekeeping until someone came and took it. So like, he does
Exactly.
keep a bunch of stuff like that could easily, like, plot for a show if they want to do it. They could easily have it like things get stolen or whatever, and they have to go like around the city and like fix things. Like
Right,
that's an
right.
easy plot for a book, but.
And that also is such another great example of like what is the world of a superhero universe like for average everyday people. And of course there would be practitioners of magic who world of a superhero universe like for average everyday people. And of course there would be practitioners of magic who
Mm-hmm.
weren't at the sorcerer supreme level or like involved in come or top person who like figured out how to do magic and worked on it in their own private way. That's such a cool idea. I love
That's cool. I have
that.
so many notes. I'm not gonna talk about everything. I swear. It's like there's so
No, I
many.
love it.
um, but yeah, they did do a lot with having like. This is my thing is they did discuss Danny's like well-meaning allyship that doesn't actually serve a purpose
Right,
because
right.
my favorite like one of my favorite things about their friendship as a whole is that they have had these discussions about privilege like since the 70s, like even like
Yeah, yeah.
1979 there was an issue where
Wait, what are you talking about? We all know politics only started getting injected into comics in the last 2 to 3
oh no
years.
they
Okay.
started with Obama and then they
Yeah, that amazing Spider-Man cover with Obama on the cover is where it all started. That's actually
oh my
yes.
gosh, Steve also there's an issue of Captain America or something where Steve is like the big reveal is he's meeting President Obama. I was like, well, this is random, but so, but
Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
they did have these discussions in like 1979 where like Luke's like,
Yeah.
wow, it really sucks that some people have to work so hard just to make ends meet and some people are just born rich. And Danny, like, it doesn't compute for him. He's like, look, you're my best friend, you can have whatever I have, man. I'm like, that's not what he's saying. Like, that's not what that
You don't
means.
quite get it, Danny.
Like, and they've had those kinds of things like throughout since the 70s, and like they did include that in the Netflix show, but like in this one it's like Danny's idea of trying to prove a point was I'm gonna
Right.
stay in jail with the people who also are not supposed to be here. And he does end up like working the case, but like he keeps making a point of like it's not right that they're in here and I'm gonna show solidarity. And Luke's like, you could just buy your way out. Like they even offered to put you
Right.
in another prison, like Martha Stewart style. Like you could do this. But he
Yeah.
refused. So
That's so interesting. I hadn't really considered the fact that it's a perfect illustration of that like allyship where you're trying to make yourself seem like you're also oppressed to like prove a point when like you said he could just fix the problem for everybody very easily and yet he
yeah,
feels like he has to prove a point and put himself on the cross so to
yeah, and they
speak.
did offer it. Like there's even that part where the guy's like, "We're gonna move you to another prison." Like they tried to explain it as like you are unsafe because
Right.
you're so powerful, but like I just imagine it was not gonna be Gen Pop like that. They weren't moving him to Gen Pop, so
Right, right.
it's and he was well meaning. I will say that he definitely did mean well. But Luke was just like, "What are you doing? Like, this is your martyrdom is not helping you." But they've had those conversations for like decades, and I've
Right.
like always really appreciated that. And of course, David Walker included it, and I didn't. I don't know. It's like they've had a lot of conversations, but I don't know if we're gonna see them have those type of things anymore. It's
Mm.
obviously still a problem, but
I mean, I don't want to say it's worse, but it feels like something that's even more relevant now, right? Like the issues that we're discussing here. What I think, what I like so much about the portrayal of Danny and their relationship in this one is, it almost feels like Danny needs this more than Luke does, because like Luke has his family life. He's like, I'm settled. I have like my thing. And Danny's like, I just can't let go of our partnership. I love being a superhero, but I also kind of need you there because that's like when I was at my best. And I think that's kind of it's
Mhm.
kind of sad, but I also think it is like a beautiful aspect of their friendship is the way they come together and rely on one another.
Yeah, and they do reference it a lot with like the fact that no, everyone has like multiple explanations for why this is, but like, he keeps saying like, "Say hi to Jessica. Tell Jessica I said hi." Like your wife doesn't like me because you don't tell her I said hi, and it's like she's just fine with you. And I'm like, well, I do remember Pulse when like Danny did not trust Jessica being around at all. And he was just like,
Right.
this is our thing. Like, you're bringing her into our thing, and I don't want this.
Classic bro behavior.
Yeah, and it was like they didn't have like the best relationship at that time, but then they
Right.
were all in the Avengers together, and that kind of helped fix it, I think. But like, he's very close to him. He's Uncle Danny, and like he's very close to Danny, and it's nice. But it's interesting. Like, he starts out with like nothing, and then gets the partnership, and then as it ends, Luke only has the partnership because of marriage is now. I don't know how they fixed it, if they did fix it, because I
think it got fixed in the Jessica Jones comic.
Okay.
But it was like very like, it was very like a pat sort of like, hey, I'm sorry. Okay. And that was it. And I was like, you just broke them up so you could like kind of have the status quo that you had in the old Alias comic. And that was really it. There wasn't, it was again like you want to revert things back to status quo, so it's the place everybody's comfortable, and then you'll just like fix things again at the very end without it being that important at all that it even happened in the first place. But yeah, it was very strange. Didn't really make any sense at all. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was gonna say I did like the nods to like the past of like Jessica and you don't get along.
Yeah, I find that when we like getting back to the whole idea of his evolution, it is so interesting seeing like the place that he's at now, where he does feel like this sort of bedrock of the superhero community. And it's interesting that, I mean, the end of Devil's Reign comes out next week. Have you been reading Devil's Reign by any chance?
No.
Okay. There's some interesting Luke Cage stuff in it, namely that Luke Cage is running for mayor of New York.
Okay.
Yeah. Because Wilson Fisk is currently mayor, and they're like, we can't beat him by like punching him in a superhero fight. We need something else. And Luke's like, I'm going to run for mayor.
I mean, I don't hate that concept, actually. That's kind of a cool. He would care about the people that perhaps Wilson Fisk would not care about. So.
Absolutely, yeah. And I hope they go through with it, because it feels like a nice continued evolution of where the character's been and where he is now, where it's like he goes from this guy who's like, I'm a hero for money only, and then he becomes like, no, I can be this like larger symbol and leader for people and put myself in a very thankless job to help folks. I hope they go through with it, and I would love to actually see like an ongoing series where he's straight up the mayor and doing mayor things while also being a superhero on the side. I think that could be pretty cool.
They're gonna be like, aren't you friends with that millionaire? Like, are you sure?
Yeah, right. They're gonna be calling him out for his ties to big business with the Rand Corporation. No, I would recommend checking it out, though. I mean, that was kind of why I was so disappointed they ended up canceling that miniseries. I think it was kind of meant to be a prelude to Devil's Reign, but the Luke Cage stuff in it has been very interesting, so it was disappointing that it didn't end up happening. But
yeah, it's like I feel like sometimes you need to have like a movie or a show coming up to guarantee you're going to get a book.
I know.
I don't like that.
Yeah. But... And Marvel has been especially bad with that lately, I find. DC, I think, will throw out weird things now and then, which I appreciate because I like the weirder DC stuff more than like the mainline stuff. But yeah, I agree with you. Like they've got a bad habit lately of just being like, oh, this person's got a movie, give them a series. And some of those series are great. Like I love the Kieran Gillen Eternals book. I think it's like the best Eternals book since Jack Kirby. But it is frustrating when you have like your Luke Cages or your Jessica Jones even. You're like, I want a series with these people. And they're like, well, they don't have a Netflix show anymore, so are we just supposed to put out a comic with them? Like, yes, that's what you're supposed to do.
And they did have a Defenders book shortly that didn't last very long, but it was supposed to obviously be like promoting Defenders when that show came out. And I feel like they put more effort into the writing of the comic than they did the show, but it still wasn't that much effort. So it was very pretty. It was drawn very beautifully. Just the writing, I was like, okay. I always go into comics like, did I learn something new about the characters? And coming out of that one, I was like, no, I didn't learn anything new. So.
Well, I think that goes back to what you were saying about why David Walker is such a great writer, right? He can take these characters that you feel like you know, and he's so good at finding new angles for them and new ways of digging into them. And it's so hard to show evolution in superhero comics, but he manages to push the needle just enough that you're like you said, you learn something new about them. You're like, oh, I never considered this angle for this character before.
Yeah, like I was a huge fan of Brian K. Vaughan's run on Runaways. So when he brought back Alex, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like it was clear I think Walker cared to bring the character back, and he made him this like new person who like somehow came in and like took over very quickly and like got all of these people following him just because he was like the most powerful person. Right. I don't know if I super love that he turned into like that weird like Monstar Space Jam looking thing like at the end. I don't know if I would have done that, but I did like what it said about like he came in and was quickly in charge, and then all of a sudden everybody in the neighborhood, including bad guys, were teaming up to try to stop him. And I thought that was a really cool way to show like as a like final act, everyone in the neighborhood comes together to take down the person who's causing what we think is the most harm. Like I thought that was a really cool way to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And again, the theme of community, right? The theme of even the villains are like, this is our home, this is our city. We might be, robbing banks and whatnot, but we still care about this place. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's such a good point too about Alex. I think what made Alex such a compelling character was he was the one without any powers, but he was so intelligent. And I feel like David Walker felt like he was almost planting the seeds for him to be like the Lex Luthor of the Marvel universe in some ways. I don't know if you got that impression too, but
yeah, because he was really just ruling by like it wasn't anything but just being the smartest person in the room,
right?
And the right resources. So yeah, I can see that. That's totally a good comparison. And it was weird. Like I kind of felt like Mariah in her own way was like manipulating him.
Yeah,
like, he was relying on her for support, like emotionally, and I was kind of like, okay, like you can't be like the strongest if like you need someone hyping you up at all times.
But... Right, yeah. And Mariah is another character in this book that I feel like also shows him taking those 70s characters and really giving them a needed update. Because that original Black Mariah comic from the 70s is rough stuff. It does not hold up.
And they did weird things. Well, I don't know. They did some things I wasn't super on board with in the show with like the weird relationship between her and Shades. I was like,
oh yes.
They did give her depth though, and like why she was so like hell-bent on where she was in that society, like why she wasn't fully on board with Cottonmouth and things like that. Like they gave her own reason for why, as opposed to like sometimes female villains, they don't really give them a reason for why they do things. And in this one, she really only manipulated people who had power. She didn't want it like personally. Like she was going to support Jeannie and she was going to support Alex, but she didn't want to do it herself. Because like, could she not have taken the Silver Soul Stone herself? Like she could have used it. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it puts her in this interesting position where she's kind of like almost like a Lady Macbeth figure in a way for a lot of them, right? Like not the one who's actively getting their hands dirty, but is willing to kind of go along with the ride and find the person who is the most powerful and hitch themselves to them and see where it goes and manipulate as needed to get where she wants to be. Mm-hmm. And I also love her design too on Sanford Greene's part, where she's got like the tracksuit and stuff. I'm like, this is great. Yeah. I was like, so cool, so great. Well, I want to ask you, like, what do you hope to see from Luke Cage as a character in the future? Like, I think we've both expressed disappointment that Marvel seems to kind of like being like, oh, it's his 50th anniversary, whatever. Now, granted, if they're like, September 2022, Luke Cage, Mayor of New York #1 drops, and it's written by David Walker, all is forgiven, Marvel.
I hope so. That's
But my question for you is like, what do you hope to see from Luke Cage in the future? Like, what would you like to see from him?
Because, they really pick and choose who's allowed to age. Like, oftentimes in Marvel, you're not allowed to age unless you're, like, Aunt May. Like, most people aren't allowed to, like, grow up. I think it would be super cool if he did become sort of, like, a guiding figure in the community. And because, in that future, Danielle Cage becomes, like, Captain America.
Yes.
So it'd be cool if he got to become, like, this mayor who tried to be the balance that we never had that worked well between superheroes in the community, but also actually caring about letting people have a second chance to make their lives better. They do get in trouble, but serve their time and try to be better people. He could be like a good balance because of like his history. He would have more sympathy for people from all walks of life.
Right.
and also not be that type of politician who just blames all the damage on the superheroes. Because they never really have a good balance between that understanding. It always has to be everyone in the public is against them, which I never understood. But
Right.
you have that also might be a detriment to people electing him, actually, him being a superhuman. But I think he could balance everything with like the knowledge of what it's like to be someone who doesn't have the power, and then to be a superhuman that understands what it's like to try to do your best and it not work. It's a long circle story. I would like for him to be a figure that kind of relates to everybody in the community and tries to keep a balance. And if he becomes a guiding figure in the future to younger heroes, that would be really cool too.
Yeah.
Because Danielle Cage is, if that still happens in this future, in this timeline, like if she becomes a superhero, like he's not going to want to be like, he's not going to want to have his daughter be crucified every single time she goes out with a team trying to be a superhero. So
totally. I love that answer. Yeah, that's
it's very roundabout, long.
No.
I completely agree. To be a good figure.
But again, like I think that's where the character needs to be at. Like the growth of him that's been so interesting is that he now is in this position where he is like a role model to people, and I think he works best like in this comic where he's sort of seen as like this bedrock, this person who you're like, he is reliable and he will get the job done because he cares so much about people. Like I think that's awesome. Yes. And I would like to wrap up with the question of, you know, you talked about David Walker being like the character or the writer, I should say, you trust most with Luke Cage. What do you feel like any future writers of Luke Cage as a character should learn from this series or from David Walker in general?
That's a good question. Because obviously everyone has their own style. I guess the most important thing I would hope that they would take forward if they were going to tackle Luke Cage in the future would be to focus on the character's heart. Like, don't just use him as a monster that scares people and is like the powerhouse that's going to come in and like, you know, knock you down if you're in trouble. Like, make sure that you focus on the fact that he has a heart, he has empathy for people. And if anybody understands what it's like to try to redeem yourself through good actions and good work, and what was it, always forward or something like that?
Yes, from the show, yes.
Focus on the character's heart and just go from there. Because that's a better way to treat the character than just having him be Mr. Scary Monster Man in the yellow t-shirt.
That was perfect. I love that. I agree with you 100%. 100%. Somebody send that to Marvel Editorial. And they put that out there because folks need to hear that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was awesome. I'm so glad you picked this book. It was like such a blast rereading this. Brought me back to some great memories. Yeah, any like final thoughts, any final shout outs you want to give to any series that you're really enjoying or things you think people should read or check out? Bitter Root, obviously. If you liked this comic and you haven't read Bitter Root, go read Bitter Root because it's amazing.
And it's going to be adapted soon. So I said soon. I don't know. They've announced it. I don't know what time frame that means. But
I feel like stuff gets announced all the time and then it just disappears into the ether.
Yeah, that's the best one to promote, Bitter Root.
Yeah, I would agree
Support
with you.
David F. Walker and Sanford Greene.
Yes, especially because it's an image book and they'll get the money much more directly than anything else, I'm sure.
Probably, yeah.
And then you can be one of those people who's like, I read the comic before the movie came out. That felt triggering. I'm sorry.
I tone it down. I'm like, yeah, I mean, I read.
No big deal. No big deal. All right. Well, I hope you have a great night. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you for setting this up. This was fun.
Of course. And I will see you around on TikTok.
Yes.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.